welcome to another edition of Moments Off the Mat. I'm Mike Willis with USA Wrestling, and today I'm joined by my good friend, Eddie Gallo. Eddie is the lead editor and owner of a new burgeoning MMA site, thefightsite.com. Ed, how are you today?
I'm pretty good. We're making do with quarantine and social distancing stuff, and I got a little puppy here, so she takes up most of my time outside of work and fight type stuff. So I'm busy. It's not been too much of a change for me.
Well, that's good to hear. Puppies make most things better, so very nice. And for the folks at home, just so they know, full disclosure, Ed and I have been friends since about 8th grade, I'd say. Does that sound right?
Yep.
So we've known each other for a while. But anyways, we're here to talk about your website, thefightsite.com. Why don't you start us off with just the basis for it?
Sure. So the fight site is basically a hub for combat sports analysis. So combat sports is basically, MMA, wrestling, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, lathe, like basically anything that, involves contact. And the point is, to fight in some form. So we cover basically anything we can get our hands on. I would say the main pieces of it right now are still MMA and boxing, but definitely we have coverage for most other sports, and all of our content is based in analysis. So we're trying to break down, what's happening, how are people winning, how are they losing, what can they do better, and that's happening in article form, video content, podcasts, and then we're also incorporating some interviews where the athletes are telling us themselves, and we're having more of a dialogue about, their process and how they do things, and it's been very cool so far.
So when did the site go live, and when did you realize that you even wanted to make a site, and maybe that there was a niche in the market for this sort of website?
So I guess the backstory is that myself and like 10 to 15 other people in this space, we were all doing this kind of stuff individually. Like I was doing it for a website called MMA Sucka, and then I started doing it for Bloody Elbow with wrestling and MMA. And all of my current colleagues were doing this in one way or another for another website. And our good friend, who's a boxing historian, Kyle McLaughlin, basically, I guess he had this idea for a while. He said, why don't we just bring this all to one place? Because that website doesn't exist. There isn't a website that covers any of these sports that's solely focused on analysis. Every site is basically trying to do everything at once, where they're doing news and interviews and taking a person's tweets and making that into an article. It's a little too much, and there's not a focus. So we figured this is something that we could do, and people really appreciate our work, so let's bring it all together and see what we can do with it. So Kyle McLaughlin started the site. He came to us with the idea this past summer, around July, August, and we launched officially around September with our greatest of all time series for MMA, and we launched that throughout a couple of weeks, and then it's been full steam since then.
Very cool. How did you end up kind of taking the reins and ownership of the website?
It was pretty organic. Originally, there was a setup where it was going to be Kyle, one of the other writers, were going to run it, and just the way things worked out after those first couple of weeks, just based on who was doing what, I think the rest of the team realized that I was the one that had experience running a website, just because I had a pretty high managerial role at MMA Sucka. I was one of the managing editors for a while, so I knew how to set up the articles and deal with pictures and run a team and all that stuff. So I just was transferring those skills to the new team, to the new site, and I was helping these guys out, because most of them, even if they had experience writing for other websites, sorry, it's the dog. Even if they had experience writing for other websites, they weren't familiar with the whole process behind the scenes, and I was. Even Kyle, who started the site, didn't really have that kind of experience, so they needed me in a sense, and I was just running things in that way. So they just figured, let's just make this official, and it's been both basically the fact that most of the responsibility has been falling on me. Everyone kind of agreed that I should be in charge in some way.
So how much of the website is actually wrestling content?
I would say a smaller percentage of it. Basically, our main wrestling content right now is the freestyle rankings that come out every month. So there's world rankings for freestyle and Russian domestic rankings that come out for freestyle, and Seth Patera does both of those. That's in articles. He's also worked on a couple breakdowns. Seth has, like, he has a Bajrang Punia series that he's been releasing. I've done a couple freestyle breakdowns, and most of our wrestling content that's like recurring, I would say, is the podcast that I run, the Wrestling for MMA podcast, which is like a split between both sports. And we also have the Wrestling Comrades podcast, which is Seth and I talking about freestyle. So it's pretty much only men's freestyle focused at the moment. We did do a lot of coverage for 2019 Worlds, and we were going to do a similar level of coverage for the Olympics. And we'll do that once it comes out. But yeah, we're doing like weight previews and breakdowns like that. But most of the content that's coming from me is still going towards Bloody Elbow because I have obligations there in terms of producing content. So I'm doing a lot of freestyle coverage there as well.
Do you see yourself expanding into Greco-Roman and women's wrestling eventually?
Yeah. It's just like there's only so much time in the day. So with just Seth and I covering wrestling, it's hard to expand, especially when most of our focus is trying to be like experts in that one field, in that one domain. So basically, once we feel like we have the means to expand our team, we want to have people that are covering all the different styles of wrestling. We don't even have anyone covering folk style yet, really, the college season. So we're going to try to expand as much as possible. As soon as we can. We just need people who want to fill those roles. It's hard because the fact that the site didn't exist is partially due to the fact that there aren't that many people doing analytical content about sports in general, and even less so about wrestling. I mean, if you look for analytical content that isn't from the wrestlers and coaches directly, it's very hard to find. Flow Wrestling does a good job with Mike Malanconico. He does a lot of, like the Behind the Dirt series and those kinds of breakdowns. He's very good with that. So that's essentially what we're doing in longer form. But yeah, it's hard to recruit for these types of things, but we're definitely looking for people that can fill those holes.
So, what is your experience with wrestling?
Mm-hmm.
I
Well,
know, I know the answer to this, but
yeah,
for
yeah. So basically, I got into wrestling because I wanted to do mixed martial arts. I saw the UFC on TV in high school, and I was like, yeah, that looks like something that I want to do based on nothing. It just looked cool. I shopped around for gyms for a little bit and realized it was too expensive, and none of them were really close, and it wasn't going to work out. And then you, at the time, a lifelong wrestler, told me, this is a good free way to get training, and you convinced me to join up in the team. So I did finish out one season JV on our team in high school. I think that was sophomore year. And then luckily I found a free avenue to train MMA after that. So I said, I don't think I want to stay on this wrestling team because it wasn't the best experience just because of the way the team was, not because of me not liking wrestling. So instead of training on a team, I was doing MMA, and then I was just studying all the wrestling I could, watching very intensely, growing my knowledge of the sport as much as I could. And it's been about 10 years since then that I've been training MMA and studying wrestling. So it's definitely built up to this point. It took a long time to reach a level where I felt like I could analyze the action. Like I didn't start doing that until about 2 years ago. So it was a lot of years of work that went into starting to make any of this content.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would be surprised that someone that only has 1 year of wrestling experience
Mm-hmm.
is, essentially an analysis guide for wrestling and wrestling styles in MMA. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think if you have a long history of competing, that's a huge advantage, obviously, because you know the mechanics of moves better. You know how your game works. You've analyzed other people's for your opponents, and if you're a coach, you do that on an everyday basis. I would say the downside of having a huge depth of competition experience would be that you aren't really thinking about other people as much. You're not thinking about explaining it to people as much. Maybe if you're a coach, you are, but then you're focused on coaching. You know what I mean? So I think the people that might be more qualified to talk about this just don't have the time in their lives to, one, learn how to present the content in a certain way, and two, like spend the time to make the content, whereas I do. So I was able to focus on this very specific way of knowing about wrestling, and like I still all the time have to go look up how does this move work, what is that called, what is he doing here. I watch the same sequence 20 times sometimes before I write a word about it because I don't know what's happening. So it's a lot of me teaching myself, which is it takes a while, but it's usually worth it. And I'm always cross-referencing. So I think anybody could do it. It just takes a long time to learn it. But it's not necessary to have been a high-level competitor to start to see some of the patterns and understand how these matches are working. And luckily, I can actually talk to the athletes and confirm these things with them, which has been a really cool and validating experience to get to know that all the work that I've been putting in isn't like completely made up and based on lies.
Um, how many, can you even approximate how many hours of wrestling footage you've watched to become comfortable with putting your analysis to writing?
I think thousands is a good estimate. I mean, if you think about 10 years of being a fan of the sport and then maybe like at least 2 or 3 of intensive study and like I'm doing at least one piece of content every week and I'm spending a few hours on that every week. I mean, that adds up. So it's definitely thousands of hours. I don't know if I've hit my 10,000 hours yet for mastery, but I definitely I'm on the way there. And you know, it's just a constant process. Like every time I go to do something new, I have to look at it from a new angle. Like today, I wrote about something in mixed martial arts. I wrote about a foot sweep that this guy hit, and it took me a couple days to check with a couple different people and look up all the different ways that it was working because I don't want to. I want to give context behind it, and not just say this is what happened in this sequence, but here's how this works generally. So just to get further education, and you know, I want to do my due diligence. So it just takes a long time to do even like a 500 word breakdown is a lot, and that's not to mention when I'm doing like career breakdowns of like Zauerbek Sidakov, for example, and it's, you know, a 7,000 to 8,000 word document, and I'm watching like every match of his I can find, and that takes forever. But you end up learning a lot when you do stuff like that. It's just a huge time commitment, and definitely not something that everyone can pull off.
Do you think you have a favorite piece you've written or a favorite analysis that you've done?
Mm, I don't know. It's tough because I do so many different formats, and I don't know which format I like best. And then like within each format, I think I have favorites. Ultimately, it comes down to the ones I spent the most time on, probably that I feel the best about. Um, I don't know, and you always kind of there's like sentimentality with like the first thing you did. Like when I first started with Bloody Elbow, I did back-to-back breakdowns of the Final X matches with Jordan Burroughs and Isaiah Martinez, and then Jaden Cox and Bo Nickel, and I put a lot of work into that because that was like my first time on a big platform. I'm like, this has to be perfect. So I mean, I spent so much time on those and tried to make sure that they were like really detailed and really accurate and give as much information as possible because that's an MMA centric audience, and I'm writing about freestyle, and I really want them to you know be fans of the sport, which is a lot of what I have to do. So I would say those two are really great. I wrote an article about Chad Mendez. He's one of my favorite MMA fighters. He was a NCAA finalist for Cal Poly. I definitely enjoyed that one. And then basically everything I've done on any world champion has been really great for freestyle just because you can explain what makes someone successful at that high level. And I always end up learning a lot, and then people always end up enjoying those just because those are the bigger names. So like the piece on Sajalayev or Sidakov or you know Dake, those were all very successful, and I enjoyed making those.
So, who exactly is reading this content? Is it wrestling fans or is it
Mhm.
MMA fans in general?
It's hard to say. For Bloody Elbow, I get some comments on the website, um, and those comments are usually from people that are like seem to be wrestling fans. They'll be like, "Oh, I've been waiting for this kind of content," and they'll tell me all this different stuff. And they seem to be pretty much in the know. And then I'll get comments from like, "Oh, I don't really follow wrestling, but I really enjoyed this." And then for the fight site, for example, I think it's almost entirely non-wrestling fans that are getting exposed to this content because of most of our base is MMA and boxing. I would say is the majority. So that's actually been a really fun experience is showing wrestling content to non-wrestling fans. And I think you'd be surprised how easy it is to convince other combat sports fans that wrestling is cool. You just have to like have the time to talk to them. And luckily we have, you know, a big group chat and we have a lot of interaction with our fans from the fight site. So we get to talk to them about it and, you know, see what they like and, you know, cater the content to them a little bit more. So that's cool. But yeah, I would say it's mostly not wrestling fans, although I do try to spread it to our base as much as possible where I'm like, I use the wrestling subreddit and I'll put it on there and I'll get some feedback. But I would say my audience is mostly not wrestling fans. which is cool because that I know I'm growing the sport.
So do you think that the potential to convert MMA fans or combat sports fans in general is there to get them on board with wrestling?
Yeah, I think it's about what you show them, and sometimes it's a very indirect route. Like they'll care about somebody because they're an MMA fighter. So I'll say, "Oh, you like Johnny Hendricks? Let me show you his matches from college," and they'll watch them because they care about Johnny Hendricks already because he's a fighter. And then maybe they'll say like, "Oh, who is he wrestling now?" I'm like, "Oh, that's Mark Perry, and he did this," and it kind of like snowballs from there, or I'll say like, oh, you like Yoel Romero? Here's another guy who beat him in freestyle. I'm like, here's Saitiev, and you go from there. And a lot of time it works that way. But sometimes if you already kind of have them on the hook and they think wrestling is cool based on a couple other things, I can say, here's the guy who is a wrestler. It's Rashidov. He has nothing to do with MMA, but he's really good. Check him out. And I would say the style of content is important. I can just tell somebody like, oh, this guy's really good. And they're like, oh, cool. And then they don't care. But I can show them like a short clip of him doing something ridiculous. And people usually latch on to that just because we live in a time where like flashy, quick video content is usually what grabs people. So I think, yeah, the wrestling community at large has been doing a good job of getting on board with that. USA Wrestling's been doing great. UWW's been doing great. Flow Wrestling's been doing that a while. So I think it's definitely there. Just you have to get it into the right hands, and sometimes you have to have that bridge there to make them have a reason to look. And then once they're looking, they'll like it.
So what content, just bringing it back to the fight site in general, what content does the best for you guys?
Does the best. We usually measure, what's doing the best based on viewership. I think that's how most people do it. Um, I would say what does the best is our roundtable discussions. Basically, the like group articles do really well. I don't know if it's because they're group articles or because they're usually relevant to like a big event that's coming up. Like we'll do a staff predictions article, which a lot of websites do, but our staff predictions will be mini breakdowns from all our staff members, and sometimes they're standalone. Sometimes we're having a conversation in the article, and I think it speaks to why the website is appealing to people, that it's a group of experts. Having all of our opinions in the same place is usually really appealing to people. And in terms of wrestling content, the stuff that does really well would be, I would say the rankings. People really like rankings. And it's cool because there is a bit of a gap there with freestyle, just because I think Flow does do freestyle rankings, but it's on and off. It's not always like a
Yeah.
thing they're committed to because they're so busy with college and high school and everything else. So if
And
people,
UWW's is based solely on
yeah, see,
tournament placement. It's not really a rankings as is a standings.
yeah, and then we have like the Russian freestyle rankings, which I don't think exist anywhere. So it's like that's content you can't get anywhere else. So that does pretty well, I would say. So that's all Seth.
Yeah, I'm assuming it's a lot of work to compile the Russian freestyle rankings based on the fact that it's not really easily accessible material.
You have to do a lot of translating to get to that information.
Um, so in general, though, you would say your MMA stuff is the most popular, and then what specific sport, like if there is one, would you say is number two in terms of boxing, Muay Thai? I
Yeah.
don't know if you guys do judo stuff.
hmm We've done a little judo, but it's not really picking up yet. But yeah, well, our number one, like most viewed article of all time, like besides the homepage of the website, is actually a kickboxing article. There was like a big heavyweight title fight in kickboxing, and there was a round table on that, and that did very well. Otherwise, our initial MMA pieces, when we did the greatest of all time series, like the top three uh, ranked fighters on that series, their specific articles did very well. And then the one on Fedor Emelianenko, which is actually lower down the list because a lot of people love him. So a lot of like the fan favorites do well for MMA, and then boxing, I would say, is the sport that has the second most attention to it right now. And I think that's because as niche as analysis can be in MMA, it's even more niche in boxing, which is so interesting because it's been around so much longer. But there's really only like one or two names in analysis in boxing right now, outside of like the people who are on TV, who are doing written content, and we have all but one of them at this point. So like that content's been doing really well. And Muay Thai, I think, is going to pull up in third pretty soon, just because we're getting connected to that fan base. And that's another sport like wrestling, like with international wrestling, for example, where the older footage is so hard to find, and like some of the results are so hard to get to. It's a sport that's hard to follow, so you need websites that guide you to the content and explain things to you. So we're doing really well with that right now.
How many writers on staff do you employ, and how do you kind of manage that all as sort of the one man management team?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the whole team, like everyone involved right now, is about 20 people. The people that are writing, I would say it's, a good number of them, a good chunk of them, like 17, 18 are writing. And it's not too tough to manage, just because basically everyone's volunteer right now. So I don't have to worry too much about how am I going to pay them all. Although that's coming up very soon. I'm going to have to start worrying about that. But it's a passion project. We're all friends at this point, so we can take some time and not worry too much about compensation, and just do it for the love of it, which is good for a startup to have. But yeah, managing the team, we have just a lot of communication. Um, Twitter is our main form of communication. We have a lot of chats for each department. Discord has been really helpful for like keeping track of things, and posting different files, and just keeping track of all the different stuff we're working on. We have bi-monthly team meetings, which is really helpful for making sure we're all on the same page. And it's just a lot of communication every day. We all talk pretty much every day, which is necessary to stay on top of everything. So it's a huge project to manage the team, really. But I don't feel like I am anyone's boss. It's just kind of we're all collaborating, and if there needs to be a decision made, yeah, I'll get last say. But it's collaborative, and I listen to them, and everyone has good ideas. So it hasn't been too difficult to manage. It is just a lot of work.
What is your goal for the website, and where do you see this site going in the future?
I think there's a lot of directions it could go in. The goal is just to grow it, and whatever seems to be working, whatever the people want, we're going to go in that direction, just because it's so niche that we have to. Um, there's a small but dedicated community, like a market segment, who wants this kind of content. So we're speaking directly to them. So we're working with them and talking to them and seeing what they want, what kind of content. So that's really helpful for determining the direction. And in terms of larger goals, I think scouting, like coaching, that kind of stuff would actually end up being very viable for us, just because we do have so many experts on staff. I mean, people that I can't believe how much knowledge they have, and how insightful they can be. I think it could be a really beneficial service, and basically just hooking up with the athletes and the coaches specifically, and working with them a little bit more to collaborate. We have an article, not an article, we have interviews coming out pretty soon where we're getting the athletes, a lot of MMA fighters, to look at their own footage and break it down with us and talk about it together. And I think people really appreciate that, because a lot of sports media is about, very generic questions, like how did you prepare for this? Like what was going through your mind? And then like outside of that, they want to know about their personal life, but not many questions are about the sport itself, because that doesn't speak to most of the audience. The casual listener doesn't really want to hear about that, and if they do hear about that, it doesn't really process. Whereas our audience does want that. So I think the future is definitely getting that direct communication, that direct line, because as much as we can say, it means so much more to people when you can get that confirmation from the athlete, like, yeah, that is what was happening, and have that collaboration. So being more involved with them, and the coaches especially, because they're doing the same things that we're doing, more or less.
Yeah. What do you think the biggest surprise has been since starting all of this?
The biggest surprise is definitely how well it's going. It's been very, very fast. Um, Patreon specifically has been the biggest surprise. We set up our Patreon account in January, so people could donate any amount, really, just to support us, and help us get microphones, and produce the podcast, and start to try to pay each other, things like that. And we set up different tiers based on content. So If you're like a $10 subscriber, you can suggest like a podcast topic, and we'll spend a good chunk of time talking about that on one of our podcasts. You also get access to like our chat, and we set up all these content tiers, and we thought our pricing on those was pretty ambitious, but people responded, and we've been growing at a very fast rate. Um, we're getting close to being at $1,000 per month on Patreon after starting in January, and being so niche. It's pretty incredible, just based on how other people in the sphere are doing financially. So just the fact that people are willing to buy in literally to our content and our team has been really cool. And like we know that we have a really high quality uh, that we maintain, but it's just nice to see that there's a good several dozen people that agree, that are willing to support us right now. So that's been surprising, but it's been the best part also.
Currently, you don't run any ads
Yep.
on your website. Do you see that changing in the future?
Um, I see it changing, not in like the traditional way. I don't think we'll ever have like banner ads or like plug in from like Google or anything like that, where it's not something that we control, or something that works based on clicks. But we definitely would like to work with sponsors in the future. I think that's a respectable way to to market ourselves, and to try to bring in extra money and gain credibility. So we're trying to reach out directly to brands and work with them. Especially if it's training gear or something really cool that we are looking toward is fanatics, wrestling fanatics, and BJJ fanatics. They put out instructional videos. Working with them would be really cool. Basically just things that are relevant to the content, because the people that listen to us and the people that read us are serious about all these sports. Most of them train, so they want to know about the different products and different ways of training and different materials they can use. So I could see definitely partnerships down the line, but probably never ads popping up in your face or on the website. Plus, we just figured out how to get the website to look clean, and if we try to put more stuff on there, it's gonna be ugly.
Fair enough. So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Mhm.
Being an MMA analysis guru slash wrestling type, um, who are your favorite wrestlers that are currently in the UFC?
My current favorites that are in the UFC, people that wrestled, have a wrestling background, not just that do wrestling, who aren't retired. I would say right now, the welterweight champion Kamaru Usman, who he wrestled at Nebraska Kearney. He's a national champion. He's awesome to watch, especially because he kind of breaks the mold a little bit, where he's like super efficient and he wrestles a lot in the cage. It's kind of a throwback to like a Randy Couture type, but he's like the next stage of that. He's like a phenomenal athlete, and he's been picking up the rest of the sport very quickly. And I just like the way he thinks and what he talks about, and he's very effective with his style. So that's been really cool to see. Other guys who are going towards the end of their careers, someone like Dominic Cruz, who fought Henry Cejudo last weekend. I've always enjoyed how he integrated wrestling into his fighting style. Basically, he picked up a lot of old school boxing techniques, a lot of old school boxing like footwork. Not like perfect execution, but the ideas are there, and he showed ways to set up takedowns that a lot of people weren't getting. The cool thing is that you can be a really credentialed wrestler and come into the UFC and come into MMA, and it's so different because in a match you're going to get to tie up with someone and get to your preferred setups and get your shots off. Whereas in MMA, there's automatically this distance between you. If you don't know how to strike to get that distance, or to have them close that distance for you, it's going to be super hard to take people down. So basically, any wrestler who shows off like some advanced knowledge or new way of getting to their favorite attacks has been cool. Frankie Edgar, he wrestled at Clarion. He was former lightweight champion. He's been really fun to watch. And then of course there's guys who like aren't Americans, or like don't have like a formal background, but they might come from a different sport, like a lightweight champion, Khabib Nurmagomedov. He has like a cool like single leg series, and he has a bunch of cool stuff that he does against the cage. All those guys at American Kickboxing Academy are doing cool stuff with the cage and using wrestling there, like Daniel Cormier. That's his team. John Jones used to do a lot of cool stuff. He used to do a lot of cool upper body. He was a JUCO national champion. I think he had some high level placements in Greco in high school. So he was a good one for throws. those are my main guys. And then outside the UFC, he was an All-American from Missouri, Michael Chandler. He like chains very well, chains his takedowns, like reattacks and everything like that very well. And there's an organization in Russia called ACA. There's just a lot of guys who have like sambo and no-gi grappling backgrounds. They'll have really high-level wrestling. One in particular named Ali Bagov is like unstoppable. He took down Bubba Jenkins a bunch of times and beat him. So there's a really high level of wrestling in MMA. I think the gap is still how to incorporate wrestling without having to deal too much with striking, or getting your striking to a level where it's not a problem. So it's been really interesting to see, and I think we're going to keep seeing higher and higher level wrestlers transitioning. So it'll just be fun to see how they solve that problem of, okay, how am I going to get to my stuff without getting hit in the face too much.
So based on who's wrestling now, college and internationally, who would you like to see to make the jump and end up in the cage?
Well, I got to mention that Bo Nickel and Anthony Cassar were both at American Top Team recently. I posted a picture with Jorge Masvidal, so I'd be super happy about both those guys doing MMA. Just like crazy athletes, crazy high-level wrestlers, both very different styles too. I could actually see Cassar having an easier time getting his wrestling going just because he's more of an outside shooter, whereas Bo needs to like get his snap downs going and get to his underhooks and stuff like that, and it's actually harder to accomplish in a fight. Otherwise, like basically anyone high level in freestyle right now, I'd be super excited to see fight. Like Americans, I know Dake has talked about it. Probably is teasing. Jordan Burroughs says he will and then he won't every other year. But guys like who are retiring, who are like on their way out, that's very common in MMA for like a wrestler who's in their 30s or their late 20s to pick it up pretty late and get into it and do well. I always kind of thought Frank Molinaro would end up fighting just based on the way he wrestles. He's committed to a coaching role. Internationally, I think any of the Russians would be great. I think the Azeris have a very physical style. The Georgians have a very physical style. That'd be cool. Yeah, those types of guys. And then in terms of college wrestlers, somebody that I really hope gets into it, which is probably not going to happen, is Alex Marinelli, just because he's such a physical wrestler. But Iowa guys don't really tend to do that often. And somebody who's kind of in between right now, just one of my personal favorites, Alec Pantaleo from Michigan. Really reminds me of Chad Mendes, and that's mostly the reason why I singled him out. But yeah, he's a great outside shooter. He has a good diversity of attacks, very athletic, good front headlock, and just he has the type of style that seems to translate well.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that insight, Ed.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you coming on, and nothing but good wishes towards the fight site. Is there anything else you want to plug, or any way to let the people know what's going on?
Yeah, I think Twitter is the best way to connect with us. So if you want to find me, I'm at Edward Gallo MMA. The fight site is at fightsite.com. You spell out .com the normal way. And I think if you can connect with us on Twitter, you'll basically have everything else line up for you, like our YouTube channel and our Patreon account and all that stuff. And you'll be able to see basically everything that we're doing if you're connected on there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Ed, and thanks everybody for tuning in. This has been Moments Off the Mat. I'm Michael Willis. Until next time.